In contrast to the lively discussion between Drakon and Helen, the 4 members of Walter's family were silent in the white Ford. Sitting in the back seat with Jacob, Grandma was still upset. It was unacceptable for Walter and Mila to be over an hour late on such an important day. Afraid of upsetting her again, Walter and Mila dared not start a conversation. Like Sophie, who was in the black Chevrolet, Jacob looked out at the white clouds and got lost in his own thoughts. The 2 cars arrived at the restaurant, which was located in the center of the city, and the 2 families greeted each other again and were ushered to their reserved table. They all sat down and placed their orders. Due to Grandma's fury, they didn't get to introduce themselves to each other and started doing so at the table. "I'm Jacob's father, Dr. Walter Brown, and this is Jacob's mother, Dr. Mila Brown." Walter stood up and introduced himself and his wife. "Nice to meet you." Drakon nodded and stood up as well. "I'm Drakon. This is my wife, Helen, and this is our daughter, Sophie. Under Jacob's good tutoring, Soph's performance in school has improved greatly," he said. "I'm grateful for the excellent care your family has given to my mom. I don't know what we would have done without you guys. Today, my wife and I want to express our gratitude." Walter began talking to Drakon. "It's no big deal. We loved having Louise with us. She has become a member of our family." Drakon waved his hand and said, modestly, "Mr. and Mrs. Brown are both well-known scientists who are well respected by everyone. We've heard so much about your work and achievements. We didn't know that you were Jacob's parents. It's a great honor to meet you," Helen added. "I'm just doing some research, and I'm still far from being a renowned scientist." Walter's face turned a bit red. He remembered how terribly he had been scolded by his mum because of his work and didn't want to focus on it this afternoon. "What do you guys do?" Mila asked warmly, sensing her husband wanted to change the topic. She also wanted to get to know this family better. It was rare to meet people who were so kind and helpful. Drakon answered, "I run a small business, and my wife runs a small design studio." "That is so nice," Walter answered courteously. Walter knew that Drakon was just being humble. Judging by the interiors of Drakon's house and the car he drove, Walter knew that his business wasn't small. However, he wasn't aware that Drakon's company was actually the biggest in all of Wisconsin. It was also one of the most prominent machinery manufacturing groups in the country. Although Helen's design studio had only about a dozen employees, it had an excellent reputation in the circle of interior designers of the city and was ranked among the top 6 design studios in the country. "Your daughter is beautiful. Is she in high school?" Mila looked at Sophie, who was sitting across the table, and smiled. "Yes, she is in her senior year. She is not a diligent student, and that's why we asked Jacob to tutor her," Helen answered with a smile. "I hope our Jacob didn't cause you too much trouble," Mila continued. "Not at all. Jacob is smart and considerate. We completely trust him with our Soph. I like him very much, and so does my husband. He will make an excellent son-in-law." Helen beamed at Jacob. Mila didn't realize Helen was being serious about Jacob's marriage. She chuckled and said that he still had a long way to go. "I'm sure Jacob will follow in your footsteps and become a great scientist, won't he?" Helen asked. "No, no." Mila waved her hand immediately and replied, "Walter and I are both in the science field and know it is too demanding of a career. That's why we have never pushed him in this direction. We hope he can live an ordinary life, doing something that he likes." Helen nodded and was satisfied with this answer. She had been worried that Jacob would put all his time and energy into his work, much like his parents, and end up neglecting Sophie. "Sophie looks so pretty and smart. She will definitely do great things one day, Mila complimented. Helen chuckled at this and said, With her current academic performance, we don't expect too much of her. We just hope that she will live a good life and can find a good husband who loves her. She's just in high school. Isn't it too early to think about that? Mila was a bit confused. Is it ever too early? Helen pointed out. The mothers were warming up to the topic as they waited for the food to arrive. In the eyes of the public, Mila was a renowned scientist, but on the inside, she was just an ordinary mother who loved to talk about her kid. She and her husband were both famous, but they hadn't kept high expectations from their son. Their lives looked dignified and high above the crowd, but it was very hard. They hoped that Jacob's life would be simpler and more comfortable. This was one of the reasons they worked so hard, to provide their son with a life that they didn't get. Otherwise, with their abilities, they could have sent Jacob to the best schools in the world and provided him with access to the best education possible. Meanwhile, Jacob had always been low-key, never using his parents' names for his convenience. He worked hard, climbed the academic ladder all by himself, and finally entered a well-known university on his own merit. One could say that his sharp brain and intelligence were genetic because of his parents, but his perseverance made him what he is today. Of course, it was not a secret that Walter and Mila had a son named Jacob. A few officials in the government and a few of their colleagues knew about him, but they also knew that they wouldn't want to bring him in the limelight and take away his childhood. They also didn't want to do any special favors for their son so that he could experience a life away from the luxury and public attention in his growing years. While Mila and Helen warmed up to each other, Drakon and Walter talked about their work on the other side of the table. Since neither of them knew much about the other's profession, their talk sounded superficial and forced. As for Jacob and Sophie, they just looked at each other from across the table. They smiled at each other whenever their eyes met, but that was it. They felt awkward talking to each other in that group, especially when Jacob's parents didn't know about their actual relationship. While the parents began to get familiar and the topics got broader and more profound, they still couldn't contribute and just observed the direction of their conversation cautiously. As the servers began placing the dishes on the table, Jacob and Sophie busied themselves with eating, which was another excuse not to join in their parents' conversations. Jacob's grandmother also sat there quietly, letting the parents bond before she brought up the main subject in her mind. You are very busy, and you don't stay in the country often, do you? Seeing that Drakon and Walter had exhausted all possible topics to talk about, Helen started talking to Walter. Oh, we do occasionally travel to other countries for our research, but we stay in the country most of the time. However, Mila and I spend all our time working in our labs at our respective research institutes. We don't get to spend much time with Mom or Jacob. Fortunately, he has turned out to be a fine young man and is very independent, Walter answered. So you don't usually have time to take care of Louise, right? Helen asked, cautiously. We have hired Uncle James to take care of my mother. We usually squeeze in some time to stay with her when we're in the country, but Mom's recent illness made us realize that there are some obvious problems with our arrangement. Mila and I discussed it, and we are considering hiring another person whose sole responsibility will be to take care of my mother, Walter replied. Grandma, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. I can still move around. I don't need hired help to take care of me. I have a suggestion, Helen said lightly. Since Louise got along with us well, and you are very busy, she can live in our home, and we can take care of each other, she added. Walter immediately shook his head and replied, No, we have troubled you enough. We can't put any more burden on you. So I'm a burden? Grandma spat out and raised an eyebrow at her son. It was clear that she was still mad at him. "Mom, that's not what I meant." Hurriedly, Walter turned to his mother and explained. "After coming back to the city, and while you were traveling, you called me twice. That's it. Doesn't it mean that I'm a burden to you?" Grandma asked, getting annoyed again. "Mom, ever since Walter and I have returned, we were making time to give lectures at Jacob's University, and then the supervisors arranged for us to be interviewed by all kinds of media. We were so busy that we didn't even have much time to sleep," Mila tried to explain. "I will be left with hired help. It seems that I'm really a burden." Ignoring Mila's explanation, Grandma continued complaining. In reality, Walter cared a great deal about his mother. However, each time he called her, she would complain over the phone for more than an hour because she missed him and couldn't stop expressing her displeasure loudly. This used to make Walter's schedule even tighter, and his mother was never happy on the phone either. Gradually, he began calling her less often, and their conversations became rare. As Grandma went on with her dilemma, a thought occurred to Mila. Maybe Mom wouldn't complain much once Jacob got married. With that thought in mind, she turned to her son and asked, "Jacob, the girl who came to our lecture with you is your girlfriend, isn't she?"
Please subscribe to the Pocket FM YouTube channel and press the bell icon for instant notification. Check out our channel for more such exciting shows.